Hey again, it's Jason from Fraser Valley Rose Farm. Today I want to talk about deadheading roses, and if you're new to the hobby of growing roses, you may not be familiar with the term. Fear not, it's something simple. All it is when you have spent blooms of a rose, one like this here is falling apart and starting to turn brown, you can pluck that off of the shrub. You would do that for three basic different reasons. The first one is just to make things look tidy, and I guess that depends on how tidy a gardener you are. Second one would be to encourage your rose to rebloom quicker. This is the reason why most people engage in deadheading activities, is to get more blooms out of their roses. The third thing is that if you're doing it with a pruner like this one, and then let's say you have a plant that has started to grow in different directions in a shape that you don't like, then you can take the opportunity of deadheading to reshape a section of the rose to bring it back into the shape that you're looking for. I've done a video on this before where I talked about deadheading roses and also for staging perennials. Everything I said in that video is still valid. I'll link it up above here. In this video, I wanted to go through the different classes of roses because I've had some questions about how would you prune, say, a hybrid tea or a floribunda or a rambling rose or a climbing rose. I'll go through all those categories here just to show you the specifics of what's the classically best way to deadhead roses and answer any questions you may have along the way. This is Alina, a beautiful hybrid tea rose. You can see that high centered form there. And something that's interesting about hybrid teas, and I'm going to say this in general because it's not true for every one of them, is that they bloom one rose per stem. You can see there's one long stem there. So if you're talking about the classic florist rose, this is the style. You can see one long stem here as well with one bloom at the top. So I'll show you this one here, how to prune it for simplicity, or how to deadhead it for simplicity. And it starts with a look at the leaves. So this leaf here has 5 leaflets on it. That's pretty normal for a vegetative part of the plant, for most parts of the plant. But when it goes to a flower, you can see up here that this leaf only has 3 leaflets on it. That one there is hormonally more balanced to try to ripen this flower. So if you take your cutting down here, just above a spot with 5 leaflets, it's more quickly going to resume growth and then it's going to flower for you more quickly. But if what you did instead, somebody's going to screech at the screen because I'm taking off a not spent flower, but if you cut it right here and now what you have is this 3 leaflet and this, well, kind of modified 1 leaflet leaf, that is not as quickly going to know what to do with the energy, and it isn't going to send back into vegetative growth and flowering quite as quickly. Let's play for real now. This is Chicago Peace, and as you can see, it's turning into a ball of mush in this wet weather. Here's a fresher bloom, and I would be inclined to leave a fresh bloom like that with all its color in place for a while, but this one here has clearly, as they say, jumped the shark. So where do I cut it back? Well, looking directly below it, I'm peeking at the leaves, and I can see that that's a 3 leaflet set there. That one there is another 3 leaflet set, but if I look a little further down the stem, I can see that that is a 5 leaflet set there. So where would I choose to cut? I'm going to cut right here, just above a 5 leaflet set, meaning that this spot right here is where I anticipate that a new shoot will come out. Now, it doesn't always follow the rules. It may indeed shoot from that spot and a couple of other stems below it. I don't mind as long as it returns to bloom, and of course, as long as I've taken the opportunity to reshape the shrub and remove any dead, diseased, damaged branches, that kind of thing. So it's just maintenance pruning, an opportunity to do some maintenance pruning as you do this. And obviously, I'm going to go ahead and do the same for all these other spent blooms here. And don't mind all of my hibiscus seedlings that are littering the floor here. That is literally what happens when you have hardy hibiscus in your garden, is you're going to get loads and loads of little seedlings that you're going to have to rake out. All right, that was easy enough with a single stem with 1 flower at the top, but what do you do when you have all these big clusters of flowers? And let's be honest, a good portion of what you're going to plant in your gardens these days has some genetics in it that is going to allow for these big clusters, where the one in the center here is actually blown a lot before the ones around it. Let's take a closer look. Well, this is Fellowship, a wonderful cluster flowering rose. You can see that on a brand new cluster like this, The center bloom tends to bloom the first, the other ones follow. You can see that same pattern on this one here, where the outer ones there are still looking fairly good, but then just in the dead center, you have one that has been completely spent, and in that case, I just encourage you to do what I see gardeners do all the time, which is just snap it off with your fingers. And that does part of the job of redirecting the energy from these blooms into new growth on the rose. Here we have the same thing, an older one in the center here, and just grasp it firmly with your fingers, twist of the wrist, and they're gone, and it means you don't have to walk around your garden with a whole bunch of tools. Now, all of that said, at a certain point, the entire cluster will be bloomed out. Then you're going to follow the same rule as you did with the solitary flowering one, which is you're going to go back on this stem, and you're going to find, in this case, and let me just clean this up for you so you can see a little bit better, is that you can see that there's a part of the stem here where it branches out, and it branches into all the different flowering stems here. And in this case, what I'd be looking for is a 5-leaflet leaf somewhere below that intersection of the different flowering branches. Okay, what about climbing roses? Well, climbing roses follow the same rules. If they're single flowering, like a hybrid tea, you would just snip it down to the next 5-leaflet leaf set. If they are cluster flowering like a floribunda, and this one is cluster flowering, then you would do the same thing of just pulling off the spent blooms by hand until the cluster is entirely spent. And when you decide the entire cluster is spent, then you just find a spot lower down on the stem with a 5-leaflet set that is ready and is the next place for this to bloom. And you can see that, of course, this one is a strong rebloomer. This is Rosarium Uetersen, and it's already got new clusters of buds up here. So some of these older ones, as they go away, will just free up energy from the plant to support those brand new buds and blooms and new shoots that will turn into blooming later in the season. All right, what about the ramblers and the once blooming old garden roses, those that just bloom once in the year and then they're finished for the year? Well, then, of course, the most important reason for doing your deadheading is completely moot. You're not trying to get rebloom out of these plants. This one is William Lobb. It's a moss rose, and it's gorgeous. And I'm going to get you some close-ups here so you can see some of its charm in the garden. It's just going to bloom that once in the season, then it'll be finished for the year. So I would just say leave this one alone. Enjoy it, soak it in, love the rose, and then once it's all finished, once everything is brown and spent, then you can look at the shape of the plant and do a light reshaping and bring it back into bounds for what you want the plant to do in your garden, and then leave it alone until next year. So they don't really require any of that ongoing attention like the reblooming roses do. I can't ignore the knockouts. The knockouts and the other landscape roses have increased in popularity. They may be the thing that is most grown in people's gardens these days, so I can't not mention them. They actually take away a couple of the good reasons for deadheading. One, they tend to drop their petals rather cleanly, meaning that you don't have that mess of balled up and mushy brown blooms on your shrub. They tend to drop cleanly. That's intentional. The breeders of these landscape roses don't want you to have to fuss after pulling off spent blooms. The other thing that they do is they tend to return to blooming relatively quickly all on their own, so they don't require much encouragement. The third reason, though, that the reshaping actually makes some sense, because they tend to be fairly robust, these again the knockouts, and put on a lot of growth between cycles. So what you can do, if you'd like, is treat them a bit like the old garden roses. Let them bloom all the way through their cycle, and then you can pull out the hedge trimmer and just give them a good shearing down to the size that you like. They'll take it just fine. Can anyone tell me, just by looking at those leaves, what kind of a rose this is? Well, of course, those ridges on the leaves tell us it's a rugosa rose, and this one is a rather attractive one called Snow Pavement. Has those kind of lavender or almost white flowers, but here I can see the lavender tones. Makes it quite an attractive thing in the garden, but of course it does turn kind of brown and mushy when the blooms are spent, and it might be nice to deadhead those. But let's look a little closer and see that right behind where each of those blooms was, it's starting to form the fruit of the roses, or the hips. And on rugosa roses in particular, those hips can be very attractive and part of the display of the roses. So you have a choice. when they start to bloom out like this, you can deadhead and shape and prune, and then get another flush of blooms relatively quickly, because rugosas are repeat bloomers. Or you can let those ripen on the plant and get the attractive and quite useful hips, because they're good for jams and jellies and other preserves, and they're big and juicy. So that's a choice you could make, or maybe you don't have to make a choice. Maybe you do the deadheading and the pruning first thing in the season, and then allow that second flush of blooms, or even a third flush of blooms, to ripen into hips for later in the season. One final question I get asked a fair bit about deadheading is whether it makes sense to be collecting stems for propagation as I do this. And of course, the answer to that is yes. On my farm, that's exactly what I do. I wait for the plants to be bloomed out a little bit, and then I go back and as I'm doing my deadheading and cutting back, then I'm collecting stems for propagation. But you do cut a little bit lower. It makes no sense at that point just to be cutting directly below the flowers or flower cluster. What you can do, however, is you cut relatively far back towards the old growth on the plant, and at that point then you can look at this stem here and realize, yeah, you probably got room for one or maybe even two fair-sized cuttings that if I just strip off the leaves right, treat them with rooting hormone, and place them under some mist or under a humidity dome, that I can use them to propagate this plant for next year or to share with friends and so on. So yes, definitely, but when you do that, of course, just give yourself some extra length on the stem so that you can get 2 or maybe 3 cuttings behind the flowers. All right, that's everything I had for you today on how to deadhead roses. I hope that answered some of the questions of what you do with different kinds of roses as you deadhead. And if you do have any remaining questions on these techniques or anything else about pruning roses, please go ahead and drop those into the questions below the video or the comments below the video, and I'll see what I can do to help.